So we're going to start. Thank you for joining us. I'm Pamela Harris Lawton, the Florence Gaskins Harper Endowed Chair in Art Education at Maryland Institute College of Art. And I'm also the thought leader for the Hurwitz Center here. Before we begin, I want to start with a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that we live and work on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands of the Piscataway and the Susquehannock tribes, that Indigenous people have lived here since the 10th millennium BC, and that their relation to this land was to travel, trade, and to hunt in this region we now call Baltimore. We recognize that the original tribes have been joined through the northern migration by the Lumbee and the Cherokee. We recognize the model they provide for wisdom and caring communities based on mutual respect, reciprocity, and reverence for the land, water, and all relations. We too honor Mother Earth, from which all life springs, worthy of our caring stewardship. We also acknowledge the people enslaved and exploited who did and do work on this land, enabling us to live. We recognize that our current systems are often unjust, that the comfort of many still rests upon the suffering of others. Here at MICA, we strive to honor the ancestors, to work equitably and honorably towards social justice with their descendants, and to use our talents and resources to work to mitigate past and present injustices. Now, a little bit about the Hurwitz Center. It was named for distinguished scholar and practitioner, Dr. Al Hurwitz, and continues MICA's 100-year legacy of excellence and leadership in art education. The mission and goals of the Hurwitz Center are to advance MICA's long commitment to art and design education and field-based social practice, cultivate a network of community-based practitioners, educators, and scholars empowered to promote innovative pedagogy and research through engagement with art and design, and to catalyze dialogue and inspire action through collaborative partnerships, events, such as this one, projects and publications that serve Baltimore, the state of Maryland, the nation, and beyond. So welcome to the 2023 Visiting Voices Speaker Series. This is an annual event hosted by the Hurwitz Center, and this year's topic is supporting LGBTQ+ artists, educators, and learners. We have 5 fabulous speakers with us this evening to discuss the challenges and opportunities LGBTQ+ identifying artists, educators, and learners are currently facing in arts education from kindergarten through college and to community settings. Issues, strategies, and resources will be presented, followed by a questions and answers period. At the end of the presentation, and Unique will be the last presenter, the audience can either enter their question or comment into the chat or unmute and voice their questions. So our panelists this evening in order of presentation are as follows. Dr. Kim Cosier, she, they, is professor of art education at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Kim is a member of the activist art collective, the Art Build Workers, and founder and director of the Milwaukee Visionaries Project, an award-winning media production literacy program for youth. With her wife, Josie Osborne, she founded Arts Echo, a program that develops teachers as change makers. Kim believes in the power of art and the human imagination to create a more just and joyful world. Dani Gonzalez, they, them, is an arts educator whose research and practice intersects queer theory with pedagogy and celebration of cultural identity. They are passionate about play, exploration, deconstruction, and community building as essential components to learning in and through the arts, challenging pedagogies of assimilation, and resisting binary thinking in artistic and individual student development. Dani is a first-generation queer Hispanic elementary arts educator living and working in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. They hold a degree in art education from Virginia Commonwealth University, and they are currently researching programs for graduate study. Ray Yang, they, them, is a non-binary Asian American artist, educator, and advocate for the arts and social justice. Ray has spent time in a range of roles as classroom art teacher, designing assessments and curriculum, working as a teaching artist for museums and community centers, leading outreach, workshops, and professional development, teaching graduate courses, and working as an arts administrator within public schools. They have facilitated diversity and equity workshops, led affinity groups, and trained with the National Seed Project. They are currently co-chair of the Arts Education Partnerships Equity Working Group, and Ray lives in Seattle, Washington. So Ray's the farthest away this evening. Meghann Harris, AKA Harris, they, them, is a non-binary design educator working at both Baltimore Design School here in Baltimore City and Girls Garage in Berkeley, California. They work to create open and accepting spaces in each of the places where they teach. Unique Robinson, she, he, they, is a queer poet, performer, professor, and proud Baltimore City native. They have been performing for 20 years and are an award-winning poetry teaching artist in Maryland with K-12 students and community members. Unique has also worked in various administrative roles with Baltimore City nonprofits and is currently the director of MICA's MFA in Community Arts Program. Unique was the chairperson of the 2022 Baltimore Pride and recently graced the cover of Baltimore Magazine's Game Changers issues. We've asked the panelists to consider the following questions in their presentations. What are some of the ways the field of art education and art educators can better support LGBTQ+ students and teachers? What resources have you found most compelling and useful? What advice can you offer art educators working in states or districts that obstruct and censor inclusive curriculum and teaching practices? And what teaching stories can you share? So Dr. Kim is going to kick off our discussion.
All right. Thank you so much for having me. I was so excited to be invited to be part of this project. And let me just make this bigger. Okay, can you see it? Okay. I work in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a place that routinely is #1 in segregation, child poverty, infant mortality among African Americans. Wisconsin incarcerates Black people at nearly 12 times the rate of white people, according to a new report by the Sentencing Project. 1 out of every 36 Black adults in Wisconsin is incarcerated. So it is in this hostile environment that queer students of all races must make sense of their place in the world here. Wisconsin seems really happy to dispose of people that don't fit, and our kids know that all too well. This is a set of statistics from the Trevor Project that has to do with this wave of anti-trans legislation that's going on across the country. And so that also sends the same message to kids that if you don't fit within our rigid gender norms, you don't have a place with us. So clearly we have our work cut out for us. First, I wanted to share some resources with you that I think are fantastic. And the first one is the little shameless plug, but I worked on this book, Rethinking Sexism, Gender, and Sexuality, which was published by Rethinking Schools, is a teacher-founded publisher of revolutionary educational resources. They have books about a lot of different resources about a lot of different issues that you might be interested in. The Trevor Project, again, has a host of resources. The picture that the image that's pictured here is from a new documentary series that they just started, and that promises to be really groundbreaking and exciting. Welcoming Schools is another place you can go to get support, and that's where I sent the checklist to Pam, who I think will share with y'all. And then Learning for Justice, which used to be called Teaching Tolerance, is another great resource that comes out of Southern Poverty Law Center. I'm a firm believer that we need to make our decisions about young people with them and not for them. Learning from young people has been my MO throughout my career, starting with my students when I was a middle school art teacher, and then my dissertation research, for which I spent a year in an alternative high school art classroom, learning from students who had been thrust out of their regular schools. Many of them were queer. And in Southern Indiana, that was sometimes enough to land them there. The irony was that though the district saw the move as punishment, the alternative school was actually a safe space for youth who had been traumatized by the system. They shared stories about being bullied by students, teachers, and administrators. The vast majority of the students in that alternative high school shared that having a relationship with adults who were committed to their well-being was the #1 thing that kept them coming to school, and in some cases kept them alive. For some of the kids, the only caring adults they had in their lives were teachers. We can make a profound difference. For the past 13 years, I've run an after-school program called the Milwaukee Visionaries Project, or MVP for short. It's rooted in the ideas about relational pedagogy that grew from my earlier experiences. It's also grounded in the idea of the urban imaginary, which is sort of the city that each of us carries around with us in our heads. And so we wanted to make a space where kids could tell their stories. I added this picture just because I absolutely love it. We have a new project where we're all collaborating on a scroll drawing, and Lucas Lovo did this picture, and I just love it. I just feel like you get me. It's sort of the ethos of our program at MVP. It's a safe, creative space where kids feel loved and weirdness is celebrated. As we build an inclusive community in MVP, we're also inspired by Black feminist thinkers who have developed the notion of home place. For bell hooks, home place is a site of resistance, but it is also a site of loving and caring for ourselves and each other. Your art room can be a home place for queer kids, whose homes can often feel more like a battleground. For young queer people, having a home place can be a lifeline. We work with them to build such a place together in MVP. I asked some of the kids in our program what advice they'd give for making schools more inclusive and welcoming. I'll use the rest of my time to share their thoughts. When I asked this question of queer students in MVP, most all of them said some version of just listen to us. So this is Franny and Maddie. And they've both been with us Maddie's been with the program since she was in 6th grade, and now she actually graduated from high school and is continuing to come as a college freshman. Franny also started in 7th grade. So they've been kind of the longest running kids in our program, and they both had a ton to say, but I kind of narrowed it down for today. Francis was the first to say, just listen to us. Literally, just listen to people. That's my number one piece of advice. If we say something's up, then there's usually something up. They repeated this throughout the interview. Maddie often got bullied in K-12 schools because she presented as masculine by students and teachers alike. She insisted that the adults in schools need to take on the challenge of supporting all students, especially those who don't fit in rigid social norms. She said that the adults in schools needed to work with students to make more spaces that felt safe for queer people. She said her former high school had a gender-neutral bathroom, but as she said, it was disgusting and not accessible to disabled queer people. Maddie described feeling lost in elementary school because teachers would often line kids up by sex. She didn't feel she had a place to go. Obsessed with cars since she was small, Maddie described trying to navigate these situations like this. It's like you're driving at 150 miles per hour and you're trying to decide if you should go left or you should go right. But instead you just fly over a jump and then you crash on the ground and then you get blamed for it. Maddie went on to say, when you're a queer person, you have to kind of make safe spaces for yourself. There aren't any physical spaces for Gen Z people to exist in. So much is on social media and stuff. So you have to do it yourself or come to MVP. To be an ally, according to them, is to boldly speak up when injustices occur in your school. Speaking up when you hear slurs or when you find out a colleague is purposefully misgendering a student, for example. Maddie gave an example of a principal who followed up on harassing behavior from a teacher when Maddie was a young child just trying to wash her hands in the bathroom. This teaches us that kids remember when we do the right thing. They both made a point to say that these teachers all stood up for kids who were marginalized for other reasons, including race and disability. So there's Amelia and Daya. Amelia, who identifies as gay, has a loving and supportive family and says she's not encountered a lot of bullying in her school. But she agreed that teachers can have a big impact on queer kids' lives. Even so, she said MVP is someplace special because y'all listen to us and kids can do what they want. She went on to say, yeah, I'm doing me and you doing you, but everybody's got everybody's back here. It's not the same at school. So this is Amelia with a little pillow she made for her girlfriend. Daya on the right-hand side was kicked out by her mother for falling for another girl. Luckily, her girlfriend Alexis's mother made a home place for Daya and Alexis. This is not always the case, of course. Queer kids are over 2 times more likely than their cis-het peers to experience homelessness. A bit shy and reserved, Daya and Alexis came to MVP together and they delight in working next to other queer staff and students. In fact, I thought Daya was going to burst when I introduced her to my wife. This is Lane and Alistair. Lane talked about how teachers can be a lifeline to transgender students. They said, there's just some things that teachers can implement to like make sure that kids are respected, especially transgender students, especially if they're not out to their parents or the people at home, but still want to be in a safe environment where they can have, a different name or different pronouns respected in school. Lane described how their chemistry teacher started the semester off with a form that asked what their system name was, what their preferred name was, and what their pronouns were. This seemed quite significant to Lane as a signal that the teacher was going to be an ally. Alistair made some helpful concrete suggestions, such as having a pronoun chart posted in your classroom. He thought it would be good to host events that are meant to get different kinds of kids together. As he said, a lot of the time it's the kids who are homophobic, so the school needs to have events that can break that down. Lane agreed and said that more connection needed to happen to stop alienating queer kids from their cishet peers. Alistair also said that teachers and principals should do more to educate themselves and students about LGBTQ communities. Lane agreed, saying, I also think education is very, very important because a lot of kids are not familiar with, I don't know, just certain aspects of LGBTQ like language and gender. Alistair finished this thought. Teachers need to learn too. Hey, be respectful. Don't be a jerk. He added, the people here at MVP are knowledgeable in like LGBTQ, and it feels safe and chill, and that's why we love it. So circling back to the idea of home place, most cite June Jordan's poem Living Rooms as the beginning of this notion, or at least in print. Of course, it existed long before that. In her article, Make Our Way Home, Radical Legacies of a Black Feminist Living Room, Alexis Pauline Gumbs says, our communities are creating housing, spiritual space to breathe, and collective space to gather without permission. As art educators, we can do this with queer kids, even if we work in places where we can't say gay. So lastly, what advice I'd give to our educators working in states or districts that obstruct or censor practices. I'd say, oppressed people have always had to find ways to work around state sanctioned violence and censorship. So make up new words with your kids and that you can, use with a wink. In the old days, folks said they were friends of Dorothy or she's playing for our team. We have had hanky codes and key codes and coloring outside the lines. What will our new language be? And then connect with other like-minded teachers in your building, if there are any. Make a safe haven of your classroom for all of the lovable weirdos. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. And now Dani will go next. Dani, you need to unmute.
I haven't done this in a while. Hi, I was talking that whole time. Oh my gosh. Okay. Thanks, Pam, for inviting me. Thanks, Kim, for that wonderful presentation. Now I'm gonna start. Hi, my name is Dani Gonzalez. I use they, he pronouns, and I'm an elementary art educator living and working in Philadelphia. I proudly identify as Hispanic, Southern trailer trash, a roller skater. I'm big on play, big on process over product, big on embodied inquiry, and I'm just a little nervous and there's a little time restraint, so I might talk a little fast. So if you don't catch anything I'm saying, I'm happy to clarify afterwards. Today I'm going to be doing a little abridged version of something I presented at the Adding Voices conference. I'm going to be talking about drag pedagogy in art education. And there's so much I could say about my first slide where we consider who has constructed gender ideals and how do gender binaries oppress everyone. I'm going to try to keep it as short as possible and say that the gender binary is an oppressive system of power that oppresses everybody. I think there's this misconception that queer advocacy is only for the benefit of queer students, but in actuality, the gender patriarchy is harmful to our cis het allies as well. The toxic masculinity is a plague. Insults like pansy or tomboy affect all students. And so we all benefit to work in solidarity against systems of oppression. And I invite you to look into the Unapologetically Straight series and Indigenizing Arts Ed, which are typed below. They're doing really good anti-colonial work that I can only look to as inspiration. And speaking of inspirations, full credit to Lil Miss Hot Mess for the wonderful article, Drag Pedagogy, the Playful Practice of Queer Imagination in Early Childhood. So I'm like fully crediting for this pedagogy. I've really just applied it to art education. So I recommend you read that. I recommend you go to the Instagram Drag Queen Story Hour. If you've looked at the news at all, you'll have noticed that there's trans bans and drag bans across the country. This is an unfortunate rise in harmful policies and physical actions taken against drag queens. So there's in the link tree in their Instagram, there's a link where you can go donate some money. Drag's expensive. Drag queens are putting themselves on the line just to help kids read. So maybe toss them a couple bucks if you can. I pulled a small quote from that article, and it says, for us, drag pedagogy is less about imitating drag queen specific behaviors and more about embodied inquiry into queer trans ways of being that reach beyond the present. And so I am not advocating for you to teach your kids how to be drag queens. You can if you want. I'm not advocating for you to teach about the history of drag queens, although that'd be cool and interesting if you did. What I'm really advocating for is for us to go beyond adding queer people to our curriculums. Like, we know representation matters and that having queer role models is important. And I'm urging us to go beyond that and think about our pedagogies and how we can embody inquiry into our daily teaching and invite students to challenge systems of power within their life. Here's a little roadmap that might help you with that. Step number 1, diversity within state standards, share a queer artist. This is what I'm talking about when I say representation matters. And in regards to limited ways of directly speaking and like saying which artists are queer, I think we're all visual artists because we believe in the power of visuals. And so queer aesthetics do exist and do resonate with students, even if you are limited in how much you can talk about an artist's identity. I remember seeing a portrait of Frida Kahlo as a high school student and just feeling so seen as a queer Hispanic person who had a unibrow. And those sort of moments can be impactful if you include representation in your curriculum. But step number 2, I'm urging you to go beyond that and reference pedagogy that challenges colonial views. And so we all know our traditional elements and principles of art, those account for formal qualities of art, but consider adding things like the postmodern principles of art, which incorporate ways of thinking like recontextualization and gazing as relevant ways of looking at art and challenging systems of power in visual representation. Moving on to step number 3, you can share careers and what types of jobs are visually creative. When I was virtually teaching at the beginning of the pandemic, I was struggling to come up with lesson plans, like I'm sure lots of us were. And so I thought I would introduce my students to different careers that involved visual ways of thinking. And I realized some of my students had limited conceptions of what type of careers they could have when they were older, whether it was through a gender lens or class lens. So I started introducing them to careers that they could all have. Like, anyone can be a barber, even though it's a traditionally masculine or thought of as a traditionally masculine job. Anyone can be a barber. We all need barbers, and it's a creative job. Cake decorators. We all need cake decorators, and it's a creative job. Same thing with fashion designers, architects, interior designers. Students love learning about the practical applications of visual arts, and they feel empowered to broaden the horizons of what their future might look like when you introduce different careers to them. You can also role model and express gender joys within your presentation. Everyone has different things that are affirming to them. Everyone benefits from gender affirming procedures. If it's things like Botox or something simple as getting a haircut, wearing a special button-up shirt to feel very professional that day. So verbalize to your students things that do make you feel good, things that don't make you feel good, so they start developing their own way of speaking that is affirming and exploratory for them. I like to explore the idea of jewelry with my students and the way wearing something sparkly makes you feel better. And sometimes boys like to push up against the idea that's like, boys don't wear jewelry. But me, especially having worked in a predominantly Hispanic communities, lots of boys have little diamond studs in their ears. They wear different gold chains, which is jewelry. They just have this gender concept of it that they're pushing up against. Step number 5, you can offer playtime and low stakes exploration within your classroom. So a student who would have to take a big project home and might be critiqued by their peers, might not feel empowered to take many risks with that project. So offering playtime within your classroom with different materials, maybe offering challenges to say, use a color you don't normally use, or imagine you're someone else making a piece of artwork and make something they'd make. And having it be very low stakes. Maybe it's not graded, maybe it's in a private sketchbook. That way that student feels safe to explore materials, which leads to my final step. None of this is possible if you don't explicitly create a safe space within your classroom. Make curiosity a norm, really emphasize process over play, and that there's no wrong answers within the art classroom as long as we're all respectful to each other. I have some practical applications of this. I'm gonna blow through some pictures. First, I want to say that there are different elements in drag pedagogy that you can incorporate into your classroom. Drag is an interdisciplinary performance that involves costume, which involves craft, sewing, makeup, alter egos, which students really love. There's a level of active imaginative play like acting, dancing, character building, comedy, and oh my gosh, stimulating visuals. You'd be amazed at how many likes drag queens and small children share. They love bright colors, they love texture, they love sparkles. I whip out a magic wand and my students go crazy. Oh, a little tambourine with a rainbow on it. If you're good, you can shake it in line at the end of class. And students love that sort of like active comedic play. We're like competing with TikTok people to keep students' attentions. So like use every tool in your tool belt. Here are some examples from my classrooms before. I've had posters up. If you can't explicitly say things like trans people belong here, why don't you say all are welcome here? If you can't outright challenge gender norms, why don't you say something like boys do cry? I used to have this mirror where my students would line up, and before they left for class, as they were waiting for their teacher, sometimes you could hear boys going, boys don't cry. And then you would hear like a girl say something like, my brother cries all the time. Like, and they start to have these really engaging conversations about something like gender emotional displays. Boop, 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 boop. Just a couple more promises. I'm trying to go fast. One of my favorite lessons is making paper dolls with my students. So they have to make a doll and then they also have to make multiple outfits. So they're starting to think again about presentation. They're thinking as fashion designers. Sometimes I urge students to think of their doll as a superhero or a super secret spy who has to think of a disguise. And so they're thinking of presentation, alter ego. We're really activating this imaginative play, and all students get into it, even though we think of dolls as this traditionally feminine thing. My boys, once you mention superheroes, they're like in it. And really, is Spider-Man that different from a drag queen? Is Captain America in his tights that different from a drag queen? No. Let students challenge symbols of power. So to the right, I have students did a graphite transfer of different artwork. So this is the statue of David, but he's got these really pretty eyelashes and his blush and his lipstick on. It's very pink. And my sweet baby Anthony, who I miss so much, I hope he's doing well in middle school. I love this artwork. And then to the left, I invited students to cut and tape things onto posters of famous artworks. So this is a portrait of George Washington, founding father, slave owner, wearing a crop top and a mini skirt. And he's got pink and pink hair. And isn't that just so fabulous? We had so much fun. Students really felt empowered to like recontextualize these symbols of power. And lastly, I have some examples of those sort of career integrated lessons I was talking about. So to the left, I have a student who was given a makeup template, and my only sort of requirement from them was that they had to display what they learned when we talked about shading and blending colors. So again, those are state standards. Those are something you can put in a lesson plan that looks totally, not queer. You're meeting the things your administrator would look for, but students are really thinking about the career of makeup artistry and who does that. Like people in movies do that, wedding makeup people do that, drag queens on TikTok do that. And you can sort of just like put boop, one little example up on a board. Students may notice it, they might not. but it's there and it's present. It's something for them to look at and think about. To the right, I have a student who's thinking about fashion design. She had to integrate pattern and, again, color blending. It was an assignment that made the very low pressure and allowed them to think about fashion as something they have control over. Thank you all so much. If you have any questions, there'll be time for that afterwards. You can also see me at NAEA in San Antonio. I'll be presenting Supporting Student Autonomy with Organization Saturday, 2:30 to 3:20. And if you attend some LGBTQ caucus stuff, I designed some really cute stickers. We're bigger and gayer in Texas. I'm so excited to see you all there. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Wow, Dani, I don't know if you even took a breath in between that. You didn't have to go quite that fast. But thank you. Those were amazing examples from your elementary school students. So next we have Ray, who's going to talk to us.
Hi, hopefully everyone can hear me. And I'm gonna try to, I feel like, yeah, 10 minutes. It's like so short, it goes so fast. But Kim and Dani, thanks so much for starting it off. And then Harris and Meghann, I'm also really excited to hear from y'all. And Pam, thank you so much for meeting this space and creating this space. Because I do, it's actually really important just to acknowledge that like we are in a time right now where, LGBTQ youth and adults are just, under attack from every single possible vantage point, it feels like, and especially currently, right? Like just feels like every day there's something else we're hearing. So I feel like this moment is so urgent and essential for us to be talking about these topics. So thank you so much for making this space. Yeah, I just kind of was thinking about this question a lot, your frame, and I kind of had this idea or this image in my head of thinking about this as tipping points, right? And thinking about like just important moments in our time when the world can kind of go one way or another with some of this stuff. And yeah, so I have a bunch of stuff. I will probably frame a few things a little bit differently than Kim and Dani, but hopefully y'all follow along. This is just a bio that Pam read, and so I kind of always have it up there at the top. I also realized recently, like oftentimes I don't necessarily mention it, but this doesn't have my day job. Is actually I work as the Director of Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Special Initiatives for NAEA. So I'm a NAEA staff member, and so I do hope to see you all in San Antonio and at the convention coming up in a couple of weeks. The other thing I like to mention sometimes, just like, I grew up on the East Coast. I'm the child of immigrants who came to the US. I was born here, born and raised in New York. And kind of slowly made my way across to the West Coast. But yeah, it's an important part of my experience as like both being a child of immigrants, but also as being non-binary, Asian American, and queer, and working as an artist and educator. So thinking about these questions, I wanted to come up with like a frame just to like consider what some of these most important things are. And so like, kind of for me, it kept on resonating or coming back to this idea of like, what do our students need? What do our peers and colleagues need? And how can we support them best as, in the education space, right? Because it's a challenge, right? Because it feels like there's so much stuff that is outside of our control and so many things that we're trying to work to do. And it feels like, we oftentimes can really, come back to like we're just trying to help support kids, right? But like it feels like there are roadblocks at every turn and it can be super frustrating. But what are the things that we can do? How can we kind of help support students and our colleagues? Thinking about some of the whys, like I mentioned, there's an urgency right now, right? This is talking about that there are anti-LGBTQ bills 430 at last count. This was a few days ago. I'm sure it's been added to since this this came up. It's showing up, and this is an important piece when oftentimes folks talk about like, well, that state is this way or this state is that way. And, I kind of want, remind folks like, but like local levels, state levels, those are entry points, right? They're testing some of these things out as like a part of like a national movement. And so there was a recent bill that was passed in the House, which is controlled by the GOP, over this parents' rights bill, which actually would basically say that like any teacher who, like knows about a student identifying as like a trans student or anything like that, you have to out them to their family, right? It's forcing them. And this bill is not going to pass. It's going to go to the Senate. President Biden's already said he's going to veto it, right? But they're testing it, they're pushing it. And so like, we talk about like, well, it's Texas, it's Florida, it's whatever state. It's not. It's going to keep moving, which is why it's actually so essential and urgent for us to be thinking about this more broadly. And there's a cultural climate that we're all fighting against too right now, right? And so how can we support people though? Just like a couple different things, thinking about like patience, safety, and care. And I'm gonna talk about all of these a little bit more thoroughly, but thoughtful conversation. And I'm gonna kind of mention that in some of my examples of my own experience. Being really public in support. Whether you are an ally or someone who identifies as like part of the LGBT community, connecting with others, because it's so important to build coalitions and community in order for us to be able to do this work. And then I think it's always important also to remember about like intersectionality, right? And thinking about how we are talking about LGBTQ students, but like the overlap and the intersection around like race, gender, sexuality, and I think Kim had mentioned it earlier, right? Like talking about like Black queer youth, or like incarcerated, killed like at disproportionate rates. And so like race is a part of this, right? It's not separate from this when we're talking about like LGBTQ youth and adults. So in my own experience, like as mentioned in my bio, I've worked as an educator, as an administrator, and one of the things that I really remember like being in the classroom is like one of the things we always try to do is just like like multiple tiers, right? I was always trying to highlight LGBTQ and queer artists because kids like need to see themselves in representation, right? And especially so I made sure on my walls I didn't have a single white male artist. It was all queer artists, women artists, artists of color, right? Like that was who I highlighted, because kids have seen enough of those, right? As an administrator, we would organize and form affinity identity spaces. And that was always really important because we were trying to create, safe spaces. And I know like in my arts classroom, it was part of that, but something that was something that came out of that I learned was when we would try to hold spaces around like, they would do affinity spaces in very like binary ways, right? A men's space, a women's space. And we wanted to create a non-binary or gender fluid or trans space. But it didn't feel like, this was in middle school, it felt like a really risky kind of space. So one of the things that we did was we created the space as LGBTQ plus allies. And so that allowed kids to come with their friends, right? And like people might talk about like, oh, like we know who the queer kid is or something like that. But, creating space so that they could be there with their peers who they felt like could support them in that space, it kind of expanded the idea of like affinity, but it also at that point, it's so, it feels so fraught with like, peril, like for kids to like be out in that way. And so when they could come with their friends, right, people who they knew supported them, actually created some like safety in those spaces. And like, we were talking about like stories and thinking about these things. One of the things I always remember, and I think when I mentioned patience, is just to understand like how our impact can be felt in ways that we don't even realize for years and years. I remember like when I'm not teaching in the classroom now anymore, but when I was, I did a lot of things to support queer and LGBTQ students and students of color as much as possible. But just this past year, I was at Trans Day of Pride here in Seattle, and was there celebrating with the community, and this person came up to me and they were like, "Ray, do you remember me?" And I was like, looked, and I realized it was a student who actually had left the school after middle school and gone to a different high school. And they're like, yeah, and they were like, I just wanted to say hi. I'm using this name now. These are my pronouns. I came out. I just want you to know, like, when I actually had never taught this student, but they came to like the spaces I held and the spaces I hosted, and they're like, like I never had you as a teacher, but like all the things you used to talk about, like those meant a lot to me, and it really like made a huge difference for me to know that there were people at the school, and like that helped me in my process. Like you were one of the people. And it was just like, whoa, like it's that moment. I think especially if you're in education long enough, you get to experience that, like that feeling of like, I didn't even realize I had that kind of an impact on that kid, or like that kind of an impact on, and that's just like one kid who I happened to come across. Like there are others, right? And so all of y'all who are in classrooms, who are teaching, like, just don't forget that like your impact is so much beyond what you expect. And just because the kids in the moment are being kind of brats or they're being knuckleheads, that like, like they're also absorbing and hearing the things you're talking about. And it's so important that like we are creating the spaces and creating the representation and talking about these things for them to know and hear and experience. I'm going to talk just really briefly about some of the NAEA stuff. This is the NAEA mission, which I always like to highlight when we're thinking about, creative growth and innovation. But, here on these are our mission, our values that we kind of publish and we're vetted by the membership. And these ones around interconnectivity and inclusivity, I think are important to like point to when we're thinking about how we're supporting all educators and also all of our students. And, I hope that y'all can also look to NAEA and know that like we're not perfect. There's a lot that we still need to learn as an organization. There's a lot we're still trying to overcome, but that there's work being done to try to like elevate and highlight, how we're supporting students of color, queer students, LGBTQ students, and also educators. And these values, along with some things like our position statements, are things that I hope you can utilize and help to support yourselves in the classroom. A couple other resources that are on here, like I've mentioned, the position statements. There's a fantastic, the LGBTQ interest group, which I think I heard Kim, like we were talking earlier about, like some of the members, and they're going to be doing a lot of work in San Antonio, which, I'll acknowledge as well. Some folks are really struggling with the idea that we're going to Texas for this convention. And I really loved our conversation at the start. Pam mentioned, it's important. We have to show up, and like, where are we going to go? Are we going to like keep polarizing ourselves and like hiding in certain places? There are things we can do in Texas to like support those educators who are doing that work and working really hard to like help turn things, right? And support their students. There are ways that when we're there, we can, think about, we're going to have a list of like businesses that are specifically BIPOC owned, queer friendly, LGBTQ owned, women owned businesses. So go spend your money in those places, right? Go do those kinds of things in ways that we can kind of better support folks. And also if you're in San Antonio and you see me, walking around, I'm probably gonna be running around like a chicken with their head cut off, like doing all that work. But like, please stop me and say hello. It's always great to be able to make connections. All right, I'm almost done. Couple last resources I'm gonna share. We talked about some things. Art of Education, they actually do some really great, they have some great articles and resources. There's one here about 6 ways to support trans students in the art room, I think is really important. Anti-Racist Art Teacher is one of my favorite websites. And you're like, what does Anti-Racist Art Teacher have to do with LGBTQ education? Remember, I talked about intersectionality, and they do have some stuff where they're highlighting LGBTQ artists. Definitely check them out. And they do a really good job of highlighting ways to think about, like, instead of using this kind of language, what if you use this language to talk about this? Because we know that in classrooms, it can be a challenge to talk about things in certain ways. I think Kim had also mentioned like Southern Poverty Law Center's Learning for Justice. They have been, this is a website they have about like supporting students. And then I think about the book bans and like the censorship that's happening. If you all don't know about this and you have students in states where these are challenges, Brooklyn Museum, I didn't proofread. Brooklyn Public Library has a program where you can actually get a virtual library card. Any teenager can apply and you can access their entire inventory, their library. And so like, they're trying to create spaces and ways for students to be able to like access those if you can't get them from your school library or in your locale. So you can take a look at that. And finally, we don't all have to always be in the front line as advocates because, we talked about like what can educators do, especially in spaces where they're really under attack and they feel like there's legislation that's like kind of really, keeping them back. One of the things you can do is think about how like in social change movements, there are lots of different roles people play. This is actually a really awesome piece that I love. Deepa Iyer, who does this thing around social change ecosystems, talks about like how in social change movements, everyone plays different roles, right? Not everyone is a frontline responder or an activist, interrupter. There are storytellers, there are healers, there are builders. Like we played lots of different roles. And so that can mean doing things like providing financial support. That can mean like writing letters to like legislators to like, push them to like, take positions on legislation that's happening in community. That's community building, right? Building coalitions. And, when we're teaching, like, a thing that I want to say is like, it's always important for everyone to take care of themselves as educators in this fight. And, like everyone has to make their own choices, but like not to operate from a place of fear and working from like, I'm not sure, can I do this? I'm worried or anxious, but also really working from a place of like, I want to be in my integrity and be, and stand for my values when I'm trying to do this work as educators. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here and for, showing up in this space. My email address is here on the bottom, as well as the NAEA email address. And I always like to say, this is something that I love, like think about like that when we're hoping to do work, that we're hoping that it's going to work. Like we know it's worth it to do that work. Hope is not the conviction that something's going to turn out well, but there's certainly that something's worth doing no matter how it turns out. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ray. Great. Thanks for sharing such wonderful resources. And so Harris is up next.
I am indeed. Hi, everyone. All right. I'm gonna get things going, but before I even get there, I just need to say, Ray, I could listen to you talk all evening. You are so full of resources. I'm also just really enjoying this, like everybody's starting to get this romantic lighting on their faces from like wherever you're at in the day and in the country. So forgive me while I have these really cool lines, but I'm kind of loving it. So we're going with it. This is also kind of, I don't know, surreal for me because I graduated from the MAT program. And I remember the year I graduated, I started an online magazine about art education, and my peer, Eric Allard, for all you wonderful MAT professors, he wrote this amazing article that was about heteronormativity. And I remember that was really groundbreaking. And that was in like 2011. And it is so cool to hear so many different thoughts being shared here, and just think about how far we've come in that time. Huge thank you to Kim, Dani, and Ray. I love listening to all three of you, and your presentations are great and unique. I can't wait because the last time I've seen you do anything, it was at the Crown and you were performing, and it was wonderful. So I'll go ahead and share, but as a disclaimer, y'all, I am a GSA sponsor. And if you don't know what that is, I'll explain, but we're going to run things as if we are in a GSA meeting today. Okay. So for those of you who have ever been a part of one, back when I'll age myself a little bit for the current MAT students, GSA used to be Gay Straight Alliance when I was in school. And then our predecessors will age themselves because they didn't get that at all in school. And so we've got all kinds of generations of educators on here. So welcome to our GSA meeting, everybody. I am sad to say, before we get there, all of y'all have been talking about San Antonio, and I have to say, I am so excited, but I wish I would see you all there. I'm actually remixing myself in the next 2 weeks and won't be at San Antonio because I am getting married. So I'm going from mix to mix. But gosh darn it, I'm going to follow all of you, and I will follow along with whatever you have to say because y'all are great. So here's what we've got on today's agenda. I'm going to tell you all a little bit about being a GSA sponsor around this time. And this whole presentation is kind of like a please steal my resources type of thing. So this, for any of you who want to run a GSA, one, this is straight from Canva, this template, and I just searched Pride, and my students love this one. So we use this every time we have a meeting. I'm going to tell you all a little bit about what it was like coming out as a non-binary teacher, talk about struggles with GSA, and then also holding my peers and colleagues accountable. So when it comes to sponsoring GSA, I teach at a really incredible school in Baltimore City. I am a Baltimore City public schools teacher. My accent, however, is thanks to Virginia, ASS Virginia. I won't say it out there, but you know what I mean. So I was born and bred in Virginia, and we did not get to be who we wanted to be in Virginia. And it is very cool to go and work at an art school, a design high school in Baltimore City that is specifically dedicated to the arts and design. As it turns out, one of our board members is on this Zoom right now. Hi, Karen. And my school is Baltimore Design School, for those of you who don't know. It's a really magical place. These are our members. So on the left, you've got our two co-presidents of GSA, Mango and Mars. And then in the middle, you've got the phenomenal CC, who has made me a total arsenal of origami stars in rainbow order. And then we've got our event planner, Shara, and our vice president, who just got promoted, actually. Bunny, AKA Helios, AKA Core. They changed their name based on their gender presentation. So any day of the week, they could be somebody else. And I kind of keep up with wherever they're at and whatever their presentation may be. Being a GSA sponsor has been one of the single greatest experiences of my adult life, partially because I grew up in rural Virginia. I don't mean Northern Virginia, I mean the middle of the state, where you don't get to be whatever you want, say whatever you want. It's not okay, you can't do it. And being around this group of students that's just very affirming and seeing what they do. We have done some really incredible things. We were part of the last Baltimore City Pride Parade. We started doing monthly Pride Days. If any of you ever want to sponsor a GSA, we sponsor monthly Pride Days where the students dress up in their Pride gear at school. And some of them wear flags around their necks, and then they kind of represent for the whole day. That is actually a really special event because the students are commemorating a day when our co-vice president Mars was actually misgendered by a teacher, and they were told they couldn't attend the boys' homeroom class. And then after that day forward, that student and all of their co-members took it upon themselves to educate the teacher. And they started wearing pride flags to school once a month, which was really awesome. And that is kind of what reinvigorated our GSA after the pandemic. At the same time, being a GSA sponsor is not the easiest thing. As I mentioned to you all, I came out as a non-binary teacher. So here's a picture of us out at Pride this summer. I will give the disclaimer that none of the students here are photographed without their consent. So that's hugely important because GSA is actually a secret club. You cannot talk about students who are members unless they are actively out and they give their consent for that type of thing. It's really important. The students, when we were out at this amazing parade, they screen printed and tie-dyed all of their shirts. They painted banners for us. They made all of their props, except for the fans. We bought those. But they did a phenomenal job. Still, at the same time, working at this beautiful art school has not been the easiest as a person who came out. When we came back from the pandemic, I did announce to my students that I was going by Harris and not Miss Harris or Mrs. Harris or any of those things. And if they needed to add a title, they could say Mix. My students got along with that just fine. It's almost always the adults who don't figure it out and need to be trained on that. That is almost always the problem. And so that's really been an uphill battle to kind of train the rest of the staff about that and make sure that they know, like, we have trans teachers on the staff, we have gay teachers on the staff. There's not just two of us anymore. Back in the day, the GSA that I run was started by myself and one gay colleague, and we were the only two gay staff members. Nowadays, we have like 8 to 9 of us on the staff, which is a really huge deal. And those of you who have ever counted that before and had to actually count and go, how many of me are there? Then you know exactly what I'm talking about, and you know that sensation. So it's a big deal. When it comes to things with GSA, I did want to touch on this. Something that people don't talk about when we're talking about working with queer teens is we make it seem like it's all sunshine and rainbows. And Valentine's standing here holding this beautiful bracelet that says, use any pronouns for me, smiling their biggest smile on the face of the planet. But actually, we don't talk about the huge intersection between mental health and queer youth and where that lies. One of the biggest struggles that I found as a person who is the sponsor of the GSA, not only with my coworkers supporting what I'm trying to do or who I am as a teacher, it is also the fact that the students have huge struggles with their mental health and then huge struggles with interpersonal connections. And so there's a lot of strife that happens there, and you have to set very clear and firm boundaries with the students. One thing that happened after returning from the pandemic is a lot of the students would start arguments and things over Discord. And part of that was they were all so excited to start Discord channels where they had friends who were also gay. Discord, for those of you who don't know, is a server. The 20 somethings in the room are going to chuckle and nod, and all of the rest of us are going to go, oh, what are you talking about? So Discord is something that I had to learn as a management issue, because my students were doing all kinds of things where they were creating arguments and fighting on Discord over various video games and who they are and what they do. And then it turned into some really serious stuff. And so that's why I say on the third bullet point, teens being teens is much more complex than you would ever think. What I found was those arguments that were happening on Discord were the beginning of them learning autonomy and what is a toxic relationship versus what is a healthy relationship, what is okay, what is not okay, what dives into queer culture, and what's actually getting into some scary sexual fetishism that is not something we should talk about in school. So teens have much deeper issues than we are even necessarily prepared. And those are really important moments to tag in people like your school social worker, your school psychologist, counselors, and people who have that therapeutic training. And those are not things that should only stay in the art room, but those things need to be referred out, because GSA is often a place where you will find those things out first. And you really need to help those students get to different providers within the school system so that they can be supported. So anybody who's really interested in supporting or sponsoring queer youth, just keep in mind, keep those people in your network, know who those people are, and know who you will refer out to, because teachers are not trained to be therapeutic caregivers. And we want to make sure that those students are as safe as they possibly can be. I'll go forward here, and then I have some resources. One of the last things I talked about is actually one of the most important, which is holding my peers and colleagues accountable. One of the most recent activities that we did as a GSA was we held a meeting with Free State Justice, which our super amazing community liaisons person at the school, Chris Frederick, helped us to do. She set up the meeting with Free State Justice. People from this nonprofit came in and they talked to my students. I learned a couple things in that moment. One, if you're ever having issues where you hit a stalemate where your colleagues just aren't listening to you and they don't hear what you are saying about what your queer students need and deserve, invite in outside organizations, because your colleagues don't want to listen to the same perspective over and over and over again. But if they hear it from someone new, all of a sudden it becomes very important, and they come back to you and go, hey, isn't that thing you've been talking about, pronouns? And you go, oh, yeah, it is. I've been telling you about it all year. Yeah. But it is also really helpful for the students, because it cements some of the lessons that they have been kind of brushing off, treatment they've been getting from their staff that they don't deserve, or things that they've started to normalize in their own environment that might be toxic, but they don't realize it's become the status quo and they don't actually have to put up with it. For example, not having non-gendered bathrooms on every floor of a building when you're talking about 4 floors and the stairs are actually quite a hike, and you might have some students with different disabilities. And so it's really important that the students can get to the specific bathroom that does make them feel safe. It's not actually normal. It shouldn't feel normal, and you shouldn't have to put up with it. So when you get outside organizations to come in to talk to the students, it shakes the staff up and it shakes the students up in a really good way that helps us to remember this is the type of treatment that we deserve. One thing that really came to light in that meeting is there's a really important Maryland state policy around how students are treated. So if any of you are teaching in Maryland or you intend to teach in Maryland, just keep in mind there is a really important anti-discrimination law that is actually written into state law. And so you need to keep it in your back pocket. The other thing that will happen, as you all can see from what I've copied and pasted here from my own school system, is that those rights will get trampled on, even if it is part of the school system's policy. And so you unfortunately have to be an expert on the law so that you can bring it back up to your administrator and say, hey, actually, this is going against the students' rights. And so we need to make sure that we're keeping that in mind. And then you can file a union grievance or whatever it needs to do. But according to my own school system, City Schools prohibits discrimination and harassment based on students' actual perceived sex, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, marital status, and or pregnancy/parenting status. That's really important because it not only includes LGBTQ plus students, but it actually has touched on really important stuff for, I had 2 pregnant students this year that I needed to look out for with this policy. I had some other students, one of them who has been talking about, they're a little bit older, and so they're talking about marriage. So just watching out for these students, it's helpful not even in just GSA situations, but in all situations. So I told you all I have some resources that I wanted to share, and I do have those. So bear with me. All right. So I have 4 different things for you. Please excuse me, because yeah, one of them is definitely coming straight off of Reddit, but I'm going to copy and paste into the chat. And again, those of you who are middle-aged or younger are going to laugh at me, and I can see Dani laughing at me right now. Yep. Got it. Cool. All right. So first thing, this is actually really great. I keep like a Pinterest board for my GSA, and we just save like healthy relationship techniques and stuff like that, and we go over them in our sessions. So one thing that we talked about together was the Gottman repair checklist. And this is just like a little printout that we brought to one of our sessions to talk about like different sentence starters. And these were just like hugely important. I like to bring them back. We're probably going to be bringing them back at our next session because it's been a couple months since we looked at this. Another thing that our phenomenal school social worker brought up was the technique called ouch and oops. So this is something where in cancel culture, it gets really hard, where somebody says something incorrect or that tramples on somebody else's feelings. And a quick way to get past that, but still keep the conversation going without someone feeling terrified that they're going to be canceled, is someone can call it to attention and say, ouch. And then the other person can say, oops, and you can keep it going without having to explain too much, which is a really nice technique. Shout out to Miss Kaplan. She's a goddess. The next thing I want to show you all is this is the Maryland state policy for anybody who's interested on non-discrimination guidelines for transitioning students. Definitely check that out if you intend to work in the state of Maryland. It is very much worth your time. This is a wonderful guide that I've used many times when it came to coming back from the pandemic, because a lot of my students were canceling each other. And so this was a really good conversation we had about calling people in versus calling them out. We in Baltimore City, there's a lot of different education about just being queer and what that's like. And especially when we're talking about coming from very Christian or religious households, and making sure that people don't feel called out, but instead you can be called in and still taught about something. And the last thing that has been a huge help to me has been the GLSEN chapter in the state of Maryland. Actually, the thing that got me to continue through GSA is we had this phenomenal person named Jabari Lyles in Baltimore City. Those of you who know him can go woo woo. So Jabari is this phenomenal human being who used to coordinate all of the GSA chapters within Baltimore City. And I'm convinced that they are an earth angel. Excuse me for the pronouns, because back in the day it was he, him, but now it is definitely not that anymore. That tells you how long I have known this person. But they are phenomenal, and they are actually, I think they still work for city government, and they have done a phenomenal amount of work to help our GLSEN and GSA chapters throughout the state, and have helped us to create a network of, I think I knew 5 other GSAs in the city before when I started this as a teacher. I'll stop sharing here, but I now went to a training this year where one, we could get credit for being GSA sponsors through the city, and I could get credit for that as a teacher. And then on top of it, there were like 30 other people in the room. 30, y'all, 30 other GSA chapters. I went from being very lonely to having a lot of people. So that's it from me. Thank you all so much. Thank you so much, Pam, for having me here. And I can't wait to hear from Unique.
Oh, thank you so much. Everybody has been absolutely amazing. So Unique, you're going to bring it home for us.
Bring it right on home. Hi, good evening, everyone, and good afternoon if you are over west, as we say in these parts in Baltimore City. So thank you again, Dr. Pam, for having me. Thank you to all of these wonderful panelists. I've definitely been here writing down links and notes and all of that. And then I deleted everything so that it's not all on my browser. So I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. And now, here we go. So, welcome. This is, I always like to start with the art. This is how I do a lot of my presentations and slides when I visit schools and just in teaching. So if anyone is familiar or unfamiliar, this art is Meghann Thomas's art. Excuse me, y'all, the last time I took French was 7th grade. Les Trois Femmes Noires is the name of this portrait. Shout outs to Meghann Thomas, one of my favorite artists, Black queer artist from Jersey. She's just phenomenal. So here's one example. And of course, we're gonna get right to it. As I am a writer and performance artist, as Dr. Pam mentioned, everything sort of has a book theme for me. So table of contents. So this is what we'll be talking through. There's some of those big questions that a lot of folks have answered. And, you know, I'll just be sort of centering myself as well as myself as an artist, educator, and performer in the city. So here we go. Here goes nothing. So given that we are in a time that is absolutely ridiculous in terms of being queer folks in the United States, LGBTQ folks, I must say that something that I've been reminded of is wherever there is great progress, there's always great backlash. That is the history of America. If anyone understands the history, we are just repeating it because no one wants to learn it, right? So, or rather, you know, they're very good at trying to mask or attempting to mask the mistakes so that they only focus on the so-called victors and basically white people running scared because they know their time of white supremacy is up. So whatever the case, with centering and understanding that, I recognize queerness not as a now place, but a future place. And I felt that way before I even landed on Jose Esteban Munoz's book, Cruising Utopia. But queerness and myself as a non-binary person, I recognize, you know, that we're almost envisioning a future where we all can exist peacefully and coexist and not have any part of our identity questioned, disrespected, or any of that, right? So I wanted to just harness this quote. This future is queerness's domain. Queerness is essentially about the rejection of the here and now and an insistence on potentiality or concrete possibility for another world. So I'm so grateful for this text. I'm digging into it as we speak, but that's really what it's about. I think that people are scared right now because there's too much future happening too quickly, right? But if anyone understands consciousness raising, I think that queer bodies and trans bodies represent that future of our consciousness and moving away from this idea of separation that white supremacy and colonialism has essentially locked us into, and moving beyond those borders in body and in community. So I really wanted to just have that as a framework for everything that I'm about to share with you. So without a future, there can't be a past or a future without all of that, right? So I have to give thanks for my very straight family for raising me and bringing me to this point, and also giving me such deep support along the way. I will say that it was very difficult coming out to my mother. I was a teenager, 16 years old. I was pushed out of the closet, actually, by some of my cousins who are no longer on this earth. God bless y'all, but y'all did me dirty. So they, you know, told my mom, so almost as like a jab. I was kind of the success story in my family. So they were like, well, what's one thing that she's not as successful as, or that, you know, we could pull one over on her. And they basically outed me to my mother. So that was a hard conversation. She came over to the house with the 1,600-page Bible. It was the whole nine, y'all. But we've come a long way. Me and my mom are in a very great place now. It's almost a non-issue. So here's me and my mom. I'm 2 years old here. And this is my mom is a huge and amazing person, super weirdo. So she's pretty much given me everything that I needed to know around this tenet of daring to be different. So daring to be different didn't really have much to do with sexuality as much as it did identity. But for me, I also heard that to be, oh, wait, that also means I'm okay. Once I got rid of all of the, Pentecostal framework around sexuality, I was like, oh, wait, I'm actually okay being different in body and sexuality and in gender as a non-binary person. My dad, on the other hand, he was completely fine with it. He's like, oh, great. Okay, that's fine. Time for me and your mom to step out of the way and let you decide who you are. Those were his exact words. So I really appreciate him for that. This is me at 4 years old. I'm adorbs. And then on the right is my grandmother. My grandmother is a retired veteran school teacher for Baltimore City Public Schools. She taught for 40 years. She retired when she was 75 years old. And that's me at 8th grade graduation from Roland Park Middle School. Long time ago. You'll never see me in a dress again. But yes, these were great times. And these are some of my greatest inspirations and sources of inspiration. So when I became the game changer in Baltimore Magazine, my grandmother actually held that poster. She has it up on her wall now, right? So, talk about religiosity and all of those things, but she still says, I'm proud of my granddaughter for doing this achievement, right? So here's a long list of all of the places that I've been teaching. So I teach at MICA, Maryland Institute College of Art. I've primarily been teaching in undergrad since 2016, but last year, I became appointed as the director of MFA Community Arts Program. So what you'll see here is me, my experiences inside of MICA in undergrad courses, as well as my work in teaching as a teaching artist with Baltimore City school students from 3rd grade all the way up till senior year of high school. So I've taught at various nonprofits, Do More Baltimore, which is an amazing organization in its 10th year that provides poetry workshops to middle and high school schools in the city, as well as community centers, you name it, Arts Every Day, a really amazing organization, Wide Angle Youth Media, multimedia organization working with youth, Leaders of Tomorrow Youth Center, an arts organization that works with youth in various city schools throughout the city. And of course, there's MICA. I've taught a course that was a critical theory course. I call it Decolonize Your Mind because that's really what it's about. Genre Experiments, which is really a creative writing workshop. Shouts out to, I see Robert on the call. Robert was one of my fabulous students last semester. Academic Writing Workshop, which is more technical. Intermediate Poetry Workshop, as well as now the MFA Community Arts Program. I teach in this as well. Course is called Making Art and Community, and I taught a course in the past on cultural competence. As stated, I was the chairperson for Baltimore Pride and Baltimore Black Pride, 2022 and 2021 respectively. I've taught with the Maryland State Arts Council. I've received awards and all of those lovely things. So this is, I had to shout this out because I think that I was out before, but this made me super out. Now I'm like really, really out. I was on the news and I'm all throughout the state of Maryland and my Black gay face is everywhere. So, and it says very plainly, Pride in Poetry, Unique Robinson, a voice for the LGBTQ plus community. So yeah, I'm out, y'all. So it was a wonderful time because I was also, doing a lot of interviews on behalf of Baltimore Pride. It was the first Pride back in person since the pandemic. So it was essentially the biggest Pride that we've ever had in the 47 years that Pride has been here. So I was really grateful to sort of lead that experience. And here's a little bit of quotes. If you want, you can read this. It's, just Google Baltimore Magazine, Unique Robinson. It'll come right up. Amazing article. This is a time to inspire people to do the things that scare them and not scare them away from it. I still believe that. And Pride has always represented a time for LGBTQ folks to be their most freest and most authentic selves. I love Pride. I've been going to Pride since I was out, since before I was out. I recognize, yes, its history is a form of protest, and I still hold that dear to my heart. But for God's sake, it's also fun. Can we just all agree that Pride is meant to be fun as well, right? Can we do both? Yes, I believe so. So there's some pictures of me in action. I was doing basically a media tour. This is myself and Kenneth Something, another amazing, openly same gender loving poet and performer and activist in Baltimore City. One of my best friends. We've been down for like 20 years. We were on No Pics After Dark podcast promoting Pride. Here's Baltimore Black Pride. And then I was on a poster, which was all over the city. And not going to play that today. It's not enough time. And yes, I was on this billboard, which was super wild, right? And of course, my mom sees this and she's like, oh my God, my child's on a billboard. Not, oh my God, my gay child is on a billboard. She was just excited, right? There's just excitement. Pride season happened. I was hosting Pride. I have a drag alter ego named Old Bay Spice. So I dressed up as her. Everyone in Baltimore knows we swear by Old Bay. I bleed it practically. And it was just an amazing time, amazing season. So why am I showing you all of this? Because this is what I also lead with now. There are young people that were at Pride that, you know, may or may not have known, you know, my professional capacity, but they see this very openly proud queer person in action. And that is inspirational for young people. They need to see that more now than ever. And so many young people have came up to me and just said, thank you. I don't know how you do you, but thank you for being you, because it shows me that I can be me, right? So we need that. I am kind of a living example of that. So I'm not going to play my music video, but I'm also a musician. I rap. I make beats. I talk a lot about the things that I want to talk about because I am not scared. I'm not afraid. I don't care what any of the opposition say. We are here to be the truth tellers, right? And we are here to be healers. So, you know, we teach Bell Hooks in the MFA Community Arts Program, and she has a really crucial quote right here. Part of our contemporary crisis is created by a lack of meaningful access to truth. That is to say, individuals are not just presented untruths, but are told them in a manner that enables most effective communication. When this collective cultural consumption of and attachment to misinformation is coupled with the layers of lying individuals do in their personal lives, our capacity to face reality is severely diminished, as is our will to intervene and change unjust circumstances. Shouts out in infinite wisdom from Bell Hooks. I think that this is exactly where we are at this time, right? Not only is there a lack of meaningful access to truth, but untruths are being spread rapidly, almost at a viral rate, literally. And who is going to be the one to tell the truth, right? And I think that that is our role as educators. So nope, I told you we're not playing the video. Nope. All right. So what are some ways that our educators can better support LGBTQ plus students and teachers? So I just pretty much said these things from the heart. And these are things that I have done in the classroom, which have worked very well. So when you begin the semester and year, I asked students when I was teaching in undergrad to create name tags, right? So you name yourself, which include their preferred name, pronoun, and some other fun fact. This not only helps me as a teacher, but it also helps to create community. And a huge part of my classes is to create community amongst the students, right? So I want them to know each other's pronouns as much as I know them. I want them to know each other's names as much as I know it, right? And some other fun fact, you know, belonging is still very big for folks in undergrad and in grad school too. Let's not pretend we all don't want that, right? But in undergrad, it's very important. They want to find commonality. A lot of folks are coming from all over the country, all over the world, and they just want to be seen, right? So what's your favorite music artist, favorite color? I don't know, right? So we do that initially, and then I ask them for the first 3 or 4 weeks to just bring out their name tags so that we can all just remember that, right? You'd be surprised how many professors still don't prioritize the naming of their students and still misgender their students, a lot of that, but that does not exist in my classroom. So also creating community agreements. These function very well at the beginning. The first week of class, I do this with students. I don't have them already listed. I co-create them with them. And that includes respecting everyone's identities and pronouns as a norm. So a good question that I lead with that is, what do you need to feel safe and supported in this classroom space? And they just, you know, sometimes I have 11, sometimes I have 12, sometimes I have 14 community agreements, right? But students are really, really excited and feel seen and heard by doing that as a practice. And, you know, I really strongly centered student-centered learning and student-centered discussion in my classrooms. I want to hear what they're thinking. I don't want to be the only one talking the whole time, right? I also teach to multiple intelligences of students, because queer and trans students learn in various ways, and many students that I've had are neurodivergent, right? Visual learning, obviously the art school, auditory learning, kinesthetic learning, musical learning, all of the above. I incorporate. So I'm using slides while I'm teaching. You know, we're learning from musical artists as much as folks in academia, as much as poets, as much as, you know, we're doing all of it, right? Being sensitive to LGBTQ plus students' lived realities and not causing further harm. How do you do that? Educating yourself if you may not be one, right? I understand I'm a non-binary person. I've been talking about queerness since like 2004, okay? But I know some folks, it might be, you know, different levels to it. So educate yourself on the ways that sexuality and gender have evolved over time to support students in their development and support teachers on feeling included, supported, and heard in the classroom space. Next slide. There's so much. Encouraging students to create artwork about their identity and, firstly, creating a safe space for students to do so. Obviously, if your class is an unsafe space, no student is going to want to do that, right? But if you create that sort of space for them, first and foremost, of trust, of belonging, then they will naturally want to do those things. So as a poet, or someone teaching writing, I use open-ended prompts, right? Really fun sort of exercise for folks who write poetry or don't is an I am poem. I usually use those with middle and high schoolers and elementary schoolers. You'd be surprised what elementary schoolers want to talk about, right? But I do an I am poem with a twist because we talk about stereotypes, right? So it's instead of just I am blank, it's I am, and they say their race, the gender that they identify with, but it doesn't mean blank. And that's when they talk about a stereotype, right? That's associated with that gender or that race. And then, we unpack it from there. And then they're talking about their feelings and their desires and their hopes and all of those things. But really, it makes it a bit more nuanced. Of course, bringing in visiting guests or artists who are queer and trans, very helpful. Showing lived examples of people from the places that your students are that are leading queer and trans successful lives, right? I also have used the poll everywhere exercise, which could also be a resource to show the genders and identities present in the room so students know they're not alone. So for example, students that identify as heterosexual versus students who identify as bisexual versus queer versus trans, trans is not necessarily a sexual orientation identity. It's more of a gender identity, but that brings me to the next point around the gender unicorn, which we'll get to in a second. But recognize sexuality and gender are not in a vacuum and often exist at the intersections of other identities, as was stated, and just affirming students' whole identity and not singling out the parts. We talk a lot about intersectionality in my classroom space, and of course, the origin of it, which is Kimberly Crenshaw. You gotta tag her. So, speaking of the gender unicorn, right? So I think this is very helpful for middle schoolers, high schoolers, elementary schoolers as well, but college students as well, to talk about that gender is not just male, female. It's not just, even homosexuality and how it's seen as, oh, I'm a male who's attracted to other males. That's so 1984 at this point, and I mean that in the book sense and in the year sense, right? It's really gender identity and gender expression and the sex you were possibly assigned at birth and who you're physically attracted to and emotionally attracted to. All of those things can be very different. They're all on a spectrum, and recognizing what that spectrum means, right? So we really break this down. So I think transstudent.org, Trans Students Educational Resources, is a really great resource for that. And they have a glossary of all of these terms so that you understand what it is. And then of course, Glisten, shout outs to Harris for shouting Glisten out as well, has a ton of resources for supporting LGBTQ students too. So I definitely utilize the gender unicorn and it works very well. And speaking of resources, so as an artist, I'm always thinking about resources that are sort of outside of the box, definitely outside of the white colonial canon. And Paris is Burning is one of my favorites. I've seen this movie 100 times and I will watch it 100 more. I know that it's made by Jenny Livingston. I know she wasn't completely right to all of the actors and actresses that were in this movie. However, it is a pinnacle text for understanding Black and brown queer ballroom scene in New York City and how this has exploded into the now, right? I never thought I would have seen the day Gaby Unique did not think I would hear terms like voguing and shade in mainstream culture, okay? But it's very important to understand where these terms came from, right? We cannot divorce the history from the present. I know the internet just makes it seem like everything exists at the same time, but we have to give credit, period. So I show Paris is Burning to my students every year. They love it. They're excited to see representations on screen, especially in the 1980s and 90s when it was not as prevalent, right? And to see those struggles and also see how far queer and trans culture has come since then. I employ queer and trans writers in the classroom space. One of my favorite books is Kai Ching Tom's Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars. She herself is a trans woman out of Canada. She's phenomenal. This book is phenomenal in that it almost feels magical realist. She's talking not about just her life and memoir. She's like, no, we're going to go to a city of smoking lights and you're going to talk, there's a whole like chosen family theme with Kai Ching Tom and, all of the girls that she meets in this city and all of the trials and tribulations they go through. It's fabulous. It's worked well. The students love it. Next slide. So as again, representation is key as stated. So here's some films and videos that I think work very well. I've shown Pose or clips of Pose in the classroom space. RuPaul's Drag Race, say what you will, it's one of my favorite shows. It brings me joy every week. I can't wait to see who got kicked off this week. All right, so Brave New Voices. I've shown that poetry, and I have to shout out Baltimore City Youth Poetry Team for winning at Brave New Voices like countless times. A lot of those youth poets have gone on to be adult poets who then go on to win in Women of the World Poetry Slam, which is also in Baltimore City this week. And Stonewall International Poetry Slam, which was hosted here in 2021, which was a bevy of queer and trans poets from all over the United States and the world. You can check out their poems on Button Poetry on YouTube. We readily watch Kimberly Crenshaw's TED Talk on intersectionality. Books, Ellen Forney's Marbles, one of my favorite books. She talks about her life with bipolar, and she's an illustrator and cartoonist, so it's done in a really smart and amazing way. It's just amazing. The students love it. Fatima Asghar's If They Come For Us, really incredible Kashmiri and Pakistani poet who talks about her life as a queer brown person growing up in the United States, whose family is from that region in India and Pakistan and Kashmir that got split by the partition. So just those histories, that legacy. Audre Lorde, amazing queer elder and ancestor. June Jordan, amazing queer poet and ancestor. Kenneth Something and Duke the Root, again, contemporary poets doing amazing work. They have a book called Baldwin Sent Me, where they talk very explicitly about their lives as same gender loving Black men in the United States. Portia O out of Chicago, I Shimmer Sometimes Too. And of course, Adrienne Marie Brown, Emergent Strategy, and talking about transformative justice as an alternative to cancel culture. Of course, we're at an art school, right? So I got to talk about artists. So some of my favorites being, again, Micheline Thomas, Kehinde Wiley's artwork, and so many others I can't even get into right now. But yes, just centering them. What teaching stories can I share? So for me, being one of the few Black queer non-binary faculty at MICA has had its challenges, but honestly, I've loved it. I'm like, yeah, I'll be that, right? Because, you know, MICA has a really big sort of mission on decentralizing white artistic canon and art history. And I'm like, hey, I've been doing this since forever, right? So that's kind of embedded in my curriculum. No one asked me to make changes. I just sort of came out here thinking, this is what I want to do and this is what I want to teach because this is how I feel seen. So I know that my students will feel that way too, but it's definitely stretched me and grown me in ways, thinking about many forms of representation and how to show that in classroom space. But again, I've been faculty advisor for the Queer and Trans Non-Binary Student Group, the member of FAFSQA, which is the Faculty and Staff Queer Alliance at MICA. Here is all of us in National Coming Out Day. We have a huge celebration for students, staff, and faculty for Coming Out Day in October. This was a joyous moment before the pandemic when everything got crazy. We have globe posters that say "Be More Gay." We're passing them out left and right. Students love them. Some have even come out to me before they come out to their parents, which is wild. But I'm grateful for it as well. Because again, what does that say? That's trust, right? They see something in me that they can basically tell their truth to, right? In a way that they are not afraid. And of course, student evaluations, I think, say it all, where they show that I've made them feel safe and supported. And I'm going to show a few of those, right? Y'all can't see this, so I'll just read a couple of them. I wish I had more opportunities to be your student. You're a wonderful professor and artist. Thank you for being so supportive and encouraging throughout this semester. You've created a safe place for students to share their artwork and feel heard. It enhanced my learning to hear other people's stories and how certain social issues have affected them. Unique is one of the most accepting and understanding teachers that MICA has to offer. Unique is amazingly talented and inspiring others. Students have told me the creative writing workshop is one of the most influential classes they've taken at MICA. I actually take students out of MICA's campus and in real Baltimore communities. So we were going to poetry slams, we were going to open mics. I'm just trying to push people off campus as much as possible, honestly. Students are sharing what they learned. Students are sharing that they adore the class. So clearly something is going well, okay? And again, MICA students are overwhelmingly queer and trans and covered the whole LGBTQ plus spectrum. So this just makes me really happy to see in live time that they really enjoy what it is that I have to offer. And this is some of the work I've done with high school students as well. Last year, I had the pleasure of working with students from Coppin Academy who were mostly freshman students or first years. And Afro Charities is an amazing nonprofit branch of the Afro newspaper, which is the longest running African-American newspaper in the country since 1892. So I asked the students what did they want to talk about as their sort of end project that they had to show to community. And they wanted to make a video about cycles of relationships and, you know, good and bad love. And not all of these students were straight. So they wanted to talk about queer relationships and toxicity and how that can come in many forms, regardless of sexual orientation. So I'll play 30 seconds.
A toxic relationship is when I believe people don't respect each other anymore. That means that you feel like you can go through your partner's phone without their permission.
Let me see your. You ain't with my phone. Let me see your. Let me see your. Can you hurry up? That's yours though. No, I don't got nothing to hide. What is this? Who's mama? My mother. My cousin. Who's here? She called me with. I don't trust none. Let me see your phone.
Yeah, so that's an example. It's a really great, you know, overall, like really amazing movie where they just wanted to share their thoughts on how they feel about relationships. I recently did work with Western High School, amazing young folks over there, where I did a 4-week art residency with them where they created poetry in that time and they wanted to call it Teenage Thoughts. I then compiled all of those poems. I worked with maybe 80 students over those 4 weeks and created a whole book. That book is about 106 pages, y'all. But you know, a lot of those students I work with were queer and trans as well. And this is an excerpt of one of the poems that the student wanted to include that they also read at an open mic, which was very brave of them. This is a trans student, as you can see, just sharing their experience and feeling safe to share that in this book. Of course, they use their pen name, you know, but yeah, just wanted to share that as well so you can read through that. I'll give you about 10 more seconds. And that's time. Thank you. So last but not least, what advice can I offer to teachers working in states and districts that restrict curriculum? So thank y'all again for your very concrete resources, but really what I say is you can silence the curriculum, but you cannot silence the voices of student critique, no classroom discussion. The students are gonna say what they say regardless. And what I love seeing about queer and trans students is that they wear the flag and they drape themselves on the flag and they're like, you're not stopping this movement. And I'm like, yes, I don't want to, right? So they're gonna be the loudest more than any of us. Like, I think their bravery will outlast all of this BS, right? And I think it will really push us forward in a major way. But we also have a role in telling the children the truth, right? And educating ourselves on what that truth is, using the articles as a way to have a real discussion on what's at stake here. It's not just about religion or ideology, but an attack on human rights. Of course, not everyone will have the same opinion, but at least open the floor for student-centered discussion. But of course, our role as educators is to be moderators to ensure that discussion remains supportive and respectful and not harmful. Of course, when all that critical race theory backlash was happening, I found an article about the queer critical race theory backlash as a way for students to really discuss how ludicrous it was, right? Students know, you know, and some of them are coming from very repressive states and repressive households, and they've been bursting to talk about these things in a safe and supportive environment. And that's it for me. Here's little Gaby me again, wearing all the colors and not caring. And yeah, there's my email if you want to follow me on Instagram. And yeah, that's all I got for y'all. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Unique, and everybody, all of our presenters. I am going to turn the recording off and